I couldn't wait to be a fighter pilot in the Navy. There were a lot of us. I mean, they were building up for war.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation. And
feel the drought coming on.
A friend of mine, a fraternity brother, had come from Pensacola and talked about the naval aviation program often. In the beginning of my junior year at Dartmouth, I looked out the window of the dorm and he was throwing his suitcase into his Cadillac convertible. The only one, I think, on campus. I said, "Where are you going, Jack?" He said, "I'm going to Boston to join the Navy." I said, "You going to Pensacola?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Wait for me." I packed my bag and went with him to Boston, and by the next morning, we were in the Navy.
So we went to the Army place and went in this building on the first floor in downtown Detroit. It was a warm, sunny day, and I saw this line lined up, and it looks like there may be 20 or 30 guys in front of us. And so Tom says, "Why don't we go down to the Navy? They're just 2 blocks over." And so we went from the Army to the Navy and signed up in the Navy right away, no waiting line, and got through the physical inspection, and then you are interviewed by a guy that's got a Navy uniform on, and he's behind a big desk, and it's very imposing. So he starts questioning me. He says, "Well, tell me about your interest in flying. Why are you interested? And did you subscribe to a flying magazine?" "No." "Did you build model airplanes?" "No." And about 3 or 4 things like that to determine my interest in flying. And he says, "Well, why do you want to go in the Army or the Navy Air Force?" And he says, "You don't seem to have any interest." I said, "Well, I have a private license." He said, "You what?" And from then on, we were buddy-buddy. And he stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Keep your nose down and give it plenty of power."
And I said, "Well, I'm not going to take a chance on getting drafted. I'm going to volunteer for something." So I had heard the Navy Air Corps was the hardest thing to get into. So I went to Little Rock and took the exam, passed. Down to New Orleans, took the exam. Didn't weigh enough to get in. So there were 3 or 4 of us who had the same problem. We went out and ate a whole bunch of bananas. Went back and they weighed us and we got in. And
We all went in as fighter pilots. I can't think of anyone who didn't sign up with the Navy who did not expect to be a carrier fighter pilot.
The squadron was formed in February of 1943 in DeLand, Florida. This was the first squadron to be formed for operational purposes of this type of airplane. Later on, there were 30 or 40 squadrons of this same model PV-1 aircraft. But DeLand was the place where it all sort of came together. The skipper was new to the airplane, had never flown it before. No one else on the squadron had ever flown this plane before. As a matter of fact, they were all in smaller airplanes like the OS-2. So a pilot came right from a single engine float plane into a plane that had I don't know how many times horsepower, but the PV-1 had 4,000 horsepower, 2,000 in each engine. And they were Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines. The transition from an airplane that was single engine and a float plane and a slow plane that was used for anti-sub surveillance and go from that plane into a monster that has 4,000 horses up there was a major transition.
It was a dangerous airplane, very high wing loading, and we had several catastrophes.
We lost our first plane in that short trip from DeLand, Florida to Floyd Bennett Field. And a fellow by the name of Al Semero was the pilot, and the co-pilot's name was kind of strange, D-I-N-G-H, I think is the way it was spelled, but no one had a chance to get acquainted with these pilots, and they had a single engine problem on takeoff. I think it was out of Boca Chica, which was used as a temporary base from which they would run anti-sub patrols south and east and around the Caribbean. So he just had a single engine on takeoff. Nobody knew him, so it was kind of dismissed. We were business as usual.
When I was instructing in the PBYs out of Jacksonville was when the sinking started along the Florida coast, and the tar, last time I was at Jacksonville Beach, the tar was still on the beaches down there from ships that were sunk along the Florida coast. And another plane load of students and mine were out the first sinking off Jacksonville. And the pilot of the other plane, I'll never forget, was the son of the governor of Pennsylvania, George Earl IV. And he had a P-boat full of students, and I had a P-boat full. We were going out to drop water-filled bombs on Jekyll Island, which is now a resort off Georgia. And he called back and he said, "There's a freighter sunk here, and there's bananas all over the ocean." It was a banana boat, and it was. There were just bananas almost as far as you could see. That was the first one that was sunk off Jacksonville, and from then on, they were sinking them like every day. There were a lot of sinkings. So it wasn't strange that there were submarines there, because they spent a lot of time off our coast, sinking everything they could. It was amazing that we could turn out all these airplanes. I mean, lines, thousands of them, and they all flew. And they were designed not with computers. They had to sit down on the board, and then somebody had to fly the first one and everything. And it's amazing we got away with it.
In an attempt to find a plane that would give us the proper answer to anti-sub type activity, they went back to the drawing boards and started with the Hudson and modified it in several ways to give it the power, the load carrying capacity, and the structural stability, and probably a few other things.
The normal crew was 5 people: the pilot, patrol plane commander, the co-pilot who did the navigating mostly, the radio operator behind the 2, a turret gunner in the top turret here with 2 50 caliber guns, and the mechanic who also was the tail gunner and photographer out of the tail.
But overall, this is a great plane to fly. It's very responsive, can make tight turns, it can slow up rapidly with these Fowler flaps if you need to, and it's just a very lethal machine.
Somebody picked up this little puppy.
So they tried to coax it over and it wouldn't come. They kept getting closer and closer, and finally Gremlin took the food they gave him and then gradually became really tied to anyone.
And he stayed with us through Iceland, the Caribbean, clear out into the Pacific and home again.
The enlisted men decided that they would hide him on the airplane when they took off for New York. So Gremlin didn't quite cooperate and let out a yelp, and the skipper asked what that was, and the radioman says, "Oh, that's just," back then it was popular to call anything you couldn't explain a gremlin. So I said, "That's just a gremlin." And then gradually the pilot realized that it was a bark, and he joined the sailors to continue to hide him, got back and presented him to the skipper, and the skipper said, "So be it."
He had his own uniform, he had his own medal display, he was disciplined on occasion for conduct unbecoming a dog. And he flew with me a lot, I was proud to say. He never messed up in the airplane, and he was just the world's greatest mascot.
A sub was sighted some 200 miles offshore, and the plane on ready duty was flown by Ted Cross, and about 4:30 in the morning, Ted got the call that he is to get his plane in the air, and so he got out in the area, and it was a day with scattered clouds at about 1,500 feet, and they were turning out of a cloud bank towards the submarine, and they wired us that the sighted sub were preparing to attack, and that's the last we heard.
He was the best flyer we had. He was a flight officer. The day that I came down, we had been in our line on our Saxons night, and radio up the hall was playing some Amos and Andy stuff. And Ted said, "Gee, Terry, we ought to have a radio." And I said, "Well, God, I got one. I got one stored in my gear down at the Rhode Island Country Club." He said, "Well, I'll fly you down tomorrow." And I said, "Well, you can fly me to Quonset." But I said, "Quonset's a long ways from Barrington." Not only that, so I don't know how long I may be there. And I'm not getting along so good with the skipper. I don't think he'd like this business if I got stuck and we couldn't pick me up. So I said, I'll drive down. So I had my car there, so I drove down. And when I came back, I drove into the gate toward the field. There was another air combat intelligence officer. This fellow had this terrible look on his face. So I stopped. I said, what's the matter with you? He said, it couldn't be worse. It couldn't be worse. Cross is dead. And there was this wonderful guy that I left that morning, just waiting for me to come back on the radio. I had the radio.
PBM reported they'd picked up 2 survivors from Ted Cross's plane. And what happened is that Ted was turning to make a run on the sub and was suddenly hit on the starboard engine. The sub was shooting back, and it was on the surface. And this is unusual because the subs usually would dive when they were spotted, and they found they were spotted. But he had the presence of mind, nevertheless, to continue on with his run. And Ted had part of his stomach with a lot of shrapnel in it, and he continued on in and dropped the 3 what they call Torpex bombs. They were 350-pound pressure detonated bombs, so they get down 25 or 30 feet underwater, it goes off. And normally you would go approach the sub with a device called an intervalometer, which simply spaced the drops of your bombs, and so you would come in at an angle, and it would give you a much better chance of penetrating the hull of the sub by going at a 45-degree angle. But his first bomb dropped quite short, and the second one went over it, and the third one landed right next to the sub but didn't go off. Obviously, he hadn't armed the bombs. Nothing caused the bombs to go off. And so he kept the plane in the air, but to drop those bombs, he had to open the bomb bay door, he had to slow up the airplane, he had to drop the wheels, and slow the plane up as much as possible, still firing at the conning tower for the guys that were shooting back. And all those things have to happen in short order, but Ted managed to get those done with the co-pilot also being injured, had shrapnel in his ankle. So he managed to keep the plane in the air and landed, we call it ditching the airplane, and landed on the water, and there was smoke filled the cockpit immediately when they were hit. And so Ted and the co-pilot and the radioman were all real close to an overhead access. So they reached up, pulled that off, obviously, and got out of the airplane and ended up in the water with Mae West. That's a life preserver, and as the co-pilot, Tom Alward, reported later, is that he tried to get Ted to come together so they could hold on to each other, and Ted intentionally slipped through his Mae West, and he couldn't stand the salt water in his stomach.
The second plane went out when they heard that he was out there. And this one, the son of Senator Georgia, Blackie George, he was our exec. He had that plane. And so he went out to the area, and we got one message from him on station, and never heard another thing. So he was shot down, didn't know what the hell it was all about. We got nothing out of this plane. So here we're starting out as a new squadron, and we have that disaster.
So we were assigned to this memorial service, and I will never forget the atmosphere as we approached this home, which was a typical New England home, 2-story frame, lots of flowers around it, and a high point that overlooked Massachusetts in August. And just beautiful sight. And, you know, 3 of us had never done this before. Really, 4 of us had never done this before, but thanks to Terry, we represented the Navy with just 4 people there, the memorial service in the front yard of this house. A nice, beautiful, sunny day, and it just struck me that this memorial service was totally inadequate. Everybody that knew Ted spoke so well of him, and that it hit all of them a lot harder than I think the skipper recognized. But that's all there was to it. We're back to business now, going to Quonset Point and getting re-outfitted to go into cold country with having to have de-icer boots and a few other things to do with the airplane that was going to operate out of a cold climate.
The weather was so lousy, and it was like Siberia. So they made extra efforts to feed us well. Gee, the meals were great.
And the camp that we stayed at was adorned with a big billboard at the entrance, this dirt road entrance into the camp. And the big billboard sign said, "Quit your belly aching. Camp, quit your belly aching." And it's spelled the way you would think it would be spelled. But the first thing the skipper did when we arrived there, and for which he was loved, is he remodeled the Quonset huts for the officers' quarters and transformed them from a very drab interior to couches with zebra stripes patterned after the Copacabana in New York. But Iceland was just a rugged terrain, high mountains, hot springs, and lava rock.
While we were there, the sun, when it finally came up about maybe 10 in the morning, would just barely show on the horizon, and then it would dribble along the horizon for 2 to 4 hours or something like that, and then disappear. And that was it. That's all the sun you saw.
But anyway, we survived Iceland with several accidents, but never lost a man.
Every time I went out in my sector, there were at least 4 U-boats plotted in that sector. Sometimes there were 6, and sometimes there were 5. They always came up at night and called home. So our guys could take a bearing on them, and then the RAF would plot them on a wallboard and show you they're out there. Our function probably was to hold them down because we only saw a few. I didn't see any. The squadron got 1 only.
And we were flying in our sector, and the skipper saw a submarine on the surface. Look, we were at 1,000 feet. He dove down immediately, but you know, we got down within maybe 300 feet, and the submarine was gone. It had seen us evidently, and it had disappeared. Thank goodness the skipper did not ask me to open the bomb bay doors, and we still had our 3 500-pound depth charges. So he said, "Luther, mark where we are now." And he says, "Give Campbell a message to send back to the base." But he says, "Mark where we are." He says, "I want to come back here in 20 minutes. In the meantime, he's telling me, he said, "You know, we came in too high." He says, "This time we're going to come in at 700 feet. Came around, and I'll be darned. We were at 700 feet, and there was a submarine, full length of it exposed, right on the surface. Boy, oh boy, he put it down and went right down over the top. And he dropped, the first depth charge was short, but almost on the side. The next one hit the conning tower, and the next one was just over on the left side of the submarine. These depth charges were set for 25 feet, and there was a terrific explosion immediately. We went around, circled as closely, as fast as we could, came around, and there were men on the top of the submarine. They had aircraft fire on each side of the conning tower. And so we made a run on them, and the skipper was aiming, of course, and shooting the 250 caliber guns that are in the nose. The third gunner had his 250 calibers, and he was firing. And we went right down, and they were firing at us. And we swooped down over them, came back and made a second run. And came back, same thing. Now, they were still firing on the second run. And on the third run, we came around, and there were men in the water. No more firing, no more submarine. Couldn't see it at all. And the skipper said, no, never forget it. He says, no fire. He says, no guns on the intercom. And the tunnel gunner took pictures. And there were pictures that were shown to everybody in the squadron after they were developed that showed 27 bodies, men, floating in the water.
So anyway, that was our only kill that was confirmed, and the skipper got the DFC for it, Distinguished Flying Cross. John Luther didn't even get an air medal out of it. He was the guy that was handling the intervalometer and the bomb bays open and the wheels down and the flaps. So he deserves credit for part of it anyway. When we left Iceland, it was an interesting day, but they recorded winds at 75 knots at 5,000 feet offshore. When we took off, we set a course, and it was about 120 degrees going from Reykjavik to Prestwick, Scotland. And when we got up to altitude at 5,000 feet, I set course, and we had the radioman let everybody know what course we were on. And we never changed direction. Keep in mind, every 50 miles, a variation would change 1 degree. And there was a cloud deck that went down to about 1,000 feet above the water. And the clouds were heavily laden with moisture, dark clouds. And I'll never forget it. We never changed the course on the instrument panel. It ended up right on time, right on course at Prestwick, Scotland. And it looked as if the Lord provided a channel. He says, just fly between these clouds and you'll make it. Every pilot that got there said the same thing. They never changed the compass heading, and the clouds just told them where to go, and it was almost miraculous. We had to wait 2 days or 2 nights for the weather to clear and for the British to give us clearance for making this trip from what was called Land's End, England, to Port Leode, Africa, which is up near Casablanca on the west coast of Africa.
And we got out to the airport, and it was pretty black, and it was kind of misty and rainy and cold and nasty. Everything bad you could think of for flying. Wheeled out on the end of the runway, and it was a big long runway going off into the black, and down the middle of it were a string of little blue Christmas tree lights. is about as good as I can describe them. And we were overloaded with gasoline because it was going to be a 7 to 8 hour flight. And we took off, and we really were nervous. It was difficult flying conditions. It was something we'd been flying out of the ice and snow in Iceland, but anyway, off we went. Flew out into the blackness, as I say, directly toward New York City, where I kind of wished we could just keep going and go home. We went on an hour and turned south, and we all made it to Africa.
Flying over from Africa to Ascension Island, I think it was about 600, 700 miles. Well, about halfway there, we lost an engine, our starboard engine, and right away we switched tanks and dropped our wing tanks, and we started flying on one engine. We had to go about 360 miles, incidentally, to this island, which is about 11 square miles, and flying on that one engine. I figured maybe we'd have the gas. I didn't know, but I told the Jeep, I said, if we see a ship, we're going to land by the damn thing, because I don't know whether we can reach Ascension Island. So I said, we'll go as far as we can anyhow. And we kept going and going, and we got in where we could get communication with Ascension Island. We asked them to send out a plane to lead us in. Well, what happened? We were flying so low, they couldn't see us. You know, the plane was blue and white, and with the ocean blue light, they couldn't recognize us, and we could see them off to our port. So I told them to shoot a flare up so they could find us. So evidently, they seen a flare, and they said, well, they turned and let us into Ascension Island. And then they told us that the height of the field was 800 feet. Hell, we were down about 100. And I said, we have to get up there. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give it all the gas we can and get as far as we can to reach it. But if we conk out, I'll try to hit for the shoreline where we can ditch, and at least we can get into the shore. Well, it happened that we could get up there, and I guess we got up about 1,200 feet anyway, or more, and I was able to get our wheels down and made a perfect landing, and that was it. But we celebrated a little afterwards.
That was so up to that point unheard of as far as PV-1 Venturas were concerned, and Warner Garris was, of course, to be commended.
And so he now holds the record for a single engine for that airplane, the PV-1. On arrival at San Juan, Puerto Rico, we just felt elated. We didn't know we were going to stop there. We thought we were going to be continued on, but it was the plan to train our squadron in low-level bombing, rockets, and napalm. The plane was re-outfitted to do a different type of work than anti-sub patrol, but still they were assigned to anti-sub coverage in the Philippine Islands, where the Japanese had what they called a midget submarine. A guy by the name of Tapuni became our executive officer when we arrived at San Juan, Puerto Rico. And then Yakeley, who was one of the best-liked skippers you could imagine, became squadron commander. And then they went up to Floyd Bennett Field from Puerto Rico, spent some time doing patrols out of New York Harbor, which they had done to begin with. And then they were all set and went across country and ended up in taking the planes aboard ship in San Diego. end the cruise and ending up in the Philippines.
We waited impatiently to learn where in the Philippines we would be sent, and they sent us instead to a small bypassed island off New Guinea because there was no room for our airplanes in the Philippines on the strip that we were supposed to operate from. We spent a month on this bypass island hunting boa constrictors and killing time and trying to keep cool when the temperature hit 120 degrees. It was almost on the equator. Suddenly we did get orders to the Philippines, to Leyte, Tacloban, a field at Tacloban on Leyte Island in the Philippines. We even had waxed our airplanes by that time with Simonize that we got somewhere. We were ready to go. We got there and the squadron that had preceded us had lost their planes in a night air raid, most of them. And as we got out of our airplanes on the airstrip at Tacloban with Army planes and Navy planes lining the runway on each side and wrecked planes in the ocean beside it, they said, "This plane is our plane. We are taking over your aircraft." Nothing we could do. We hitchhiked back to our little island off New Guinea and sent 14 crews, I think, back to the States for new airplanes. Our waxed and shiny airplanes stayed in the Philippines. By the time we got the new airplanes back, we did have orders to Tacloban and then Samar Island, and started patrols out of Samar looking for submarines. We were there during the monsoon season in 1945, and monsoons were almost like flying through solid water. And we were at low level, so we were not above it, we were in it. And the engine would spit and hesitate, and that is a lifetime experience all by itself when you're out over the ocean. But it never quit altogether on any of us. But it was heart-wrenching, to put it mildly. The day Tapuni and two other crews took off to attack a submarine docked at Cebu City on the island of Cebu in the Philippines, I was scheduled for a patrol along the same route that they were going to go. So I scheduled my patrol to be there at the same time in case maybe I could help. I probably shouldn't have been there. But I saw 3 planes make their attacks, and I saw one plane go in. He made his run on the docks and just kept going on and landed right in the middle of Cebu City and blew up. I thought it was George Hall's plane. And so my co-pilot and I said, "Boy, that's it for George." And we went on with our patrol. Came home, landed, and walked into the tent to debrief, and there was George Hall and his crew debriefing. I've never gotten over the feeling of seeing somebody that I thought had gone, and there they were, and to find out that it was Tapuni, of course, was a terrible shock. He was the pilot who sank the first sub from the air by a Navy airplane out of Argentia, Newfoundland, with Squadron VPB-128 flying PV. We were then transferred to Palawan, as we used to call it, but I'm told it should be Palawan, in April, and were there until July. We were under the orders of the 13th Air Force, Army, assigned to targets in Borneo. At the same time looking for submarines, but mainly armed for land strikes on enemy installations in Borneo. The Japanese had been pretty much bypassed in Borneo, but they were still there. We had night bombing raids occasionally by Washing Machine Charlie, the little brave Japanese that would come and drop the bombs at night to keep everybody awake. That's where we learned to dig foxholes in the sand. We got occasional ground fire, and in one case they had bombs in the palm trees that were set off as we went over, and they would raise the tail of the airplane. You could feel the tail go up as we went over. They were ineffective. We had the one most serious strike we had was on a little island called Itu Aba in the South China Sea, and we destroyed the radar installation and a radio tower there, and did not lose any aircraft, although we could see the Army B-25s in the water in the lagoon as we flew in on our strike. I claim that we went 500 miles an hour in the dive there, and I'm kidded about it, and probably should be, but I'm sure I was going 500 miles an hour to get it over with as fast as possible. Our intelligence officer had a favorite song, and it was the Whiffenpoof song, which was a Yale song, a Yale group.
And then it ends up with ba, 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 you know, we are poor little lambs who have lost our way.
Singing of the songs we love so well, shall I wasting and Mavourneen and the rest. We will serenade our Louis while life and voice shall last. Then we'll pass and be forgotten with the rest. We are poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. We are little black sheep who have gone astray. Ba, ba, ba. Gentlemen songsters off on a spree, damned from here to eternity.
It sounds, I guess, strange to hear somebody say that everybody was good and great, but that's the way I remember it. They were.